You hear that? Caleb Cole muttered under his breath, eyes narrowing as rain pounded the asphalt like a relentless drum. The streets of Millhaven, Ohio were rivers now, water clawing at the curbs and gurgling through drains that groaned under the weight. Atlas, his German shepherd, chestnut and sable glistening with wet fur, strained at the leash, ears pricked, tail stiff, then yanked him forward with a force that made Caleb stumble. The tunnel entrance loomed ahead, half submerged, water swirling at its mouth like a living thing, dark and impenetrable. Caleb's boots splashed through the rising floodwater, each step sending chills up his spine, cold seeping through his soaked jacket, clinging to his body like a second skin. The air smelled of wet concrete, river mud, and the tang of rusted metal. He paused at the edge, flashlight trembling in his hand, beams slicing through the sheets of rain and murky water, catching the edge of broken concrete and fallen debris. Atlas barked once, low and urgent, then sat, eyes locked on the darkness beyond, as if listening to a sound only he could hear. Caleb swallowed hard, the memory of the failed rescue from years ago pressing against his ribs like a weight. The voice of his younger sister calling in the flood, the helplessness, the guilt. He pushed it back, forced his focus on the present. Atlas whined softly, pacing a few steps, sniffing the air, then pawing at a small puddle, water rippling with faint gurgles beneath. Caleb noticed the glint of something metallic partially submerged, a child's bracelet perhaps, tangled in driftwood. He took a deep breath, the wet, sharp air filling his lungs, and stepped forward, letting Atlas lead him into the mouth of the tunnel. The water was cold past his knees, carrying with it debris, sticks, leaves, and the faint smell of decay. The tunnel walls were slick, rough concrete pocked with years of neglect, the fluorescent light from above barely piercing the darkness, casting shadows that flickered across the rippling surface. A distant sound made him freeze, a faint metallic tap that echoed softly, almost drowned by the roar of the flood outside. Atlas stopped, head tilted, ears flattened, nostrils flaring. Caleb crouched, squinting, listening, and then the sound came again, a rhythm, 3 soft taps against the concrete floor, deliberate, a call for help. His heart pounded, adrenaline surging, every nerve alive with tension. He whispered, "Hold on, I'm coming," and waded deeper, water now past his waist, flashlight beam dancing on the rough walls, reflecting in pools where the current had carved small eddies. The tunnel narrowed, the smell of stagnant water growing stronger, a faint earthy sweetness mingled with oil and wet stone. Atlas moved ahead with precision, paused silent despite the water, nose close to the ground, ears twitching at every distant drip or splash. Caleb's eyes scanned the shadows, every outline of debris a potential obstacle, every movement a signal. Then, faintly, he saw it. A small hand emerging from a pocket of air in the water, fingers clinging to a metal grate. The child, no more than 6 years old, face pale, lips tinged blue, eyes wide with fear but alive. Caleb's chest tightened as he stepped closer, water sloshing around him, the current tugging at his legs, Atlas positioning himself protectively between Caleb and the rushing water, growling softly, a warning and reassurance at once. Caleb extended a hand, voice steady despite the pounding of rain and water around them. "I've got you, kid. Stay with me." The child's small fingers gripped his tightly, trembling, and Caleb felt Atlas brush against the child, warm fur against cold skin, grounding, anchoring. The sound of water surging past the tunnel's mouth was deafening, but inside, in this fragile pocket of survival, a quiet miracle was unfolding, a bond of trust and loyalty between Marine, K9, and child. As Caleb gently lifted the child, Atlas nudging and guiding them toward a slightly higher ledge where air was clear, dripping water off the concrete above. Caleb's eyes flicked up briefly to the distant tunnel exit, barely visible through sheets of rain and darkness, and he whispered, "We're going to make it. We have to." The child shivered violently, not from cold alone, but from relief beginning to seep in, and Atlas let out a soft, approving bark, tail, sweeping the surface of the water, marking a rhythm, a heartbeat amidst chaos, guiding them through the flooded darkness toward the hope waiting just beyond the tunnel mouth. Caleb took a deep breath as he adjusted the strap of his flashlight, the beam cutting through the murky water that lapped at his waist, casting jittering shadows along the walls of the tunnel. Atlas pressed close, muscles coiled and ready, ears alert to every subtle echo, every drop of water bouncing off concrete. Caleb's mind raced as he recalled his years in search and rescue. The drills, the exercises, the missions where seconds meant life or death. Yet none had felt like this. Not with the water swirling, the darkness closing in, and the small hand he had just gripped still trembling against his own. He thought of his sister again, long gone, and how he had promised himself he would never let another child be lost, never again. The air in the tunnel was thick, a mix of wet stone, river mud, and the faint scent of oil from old machinery, carrying the chill that made his teeth chatter despite his heavy jacket. He listened carefully, straining to hear the faintest movement, every sound magnified in the enclosed space. Atlas stopped suddenly, nose low to the ground, pawing at the water, eyes flicking toward a darker alcove where the current seemed weaker, a pocket of stillness in the chaos. Caleb waded toward the spot, boots sinking into soft debris, water tugging at his legs, and felt a glimmer of hope stir. He called softly, voice steady but low, "Lily, can you hear me?" The reply was a gurgle, faint, almost lost beneath the roar of the tunnel, but enough to confirm life. Atlas growled softly, a warning and an encouragement, and Caleb pressed forward, feeling the water rise higher with each step. He noted the twisted metal and broken concrete that could have trapped them, his heart tightening at the thought of what could have been. Yet every obstacle also affirmed his resolve. The child had survived this long, and Caleb was not about to let the water take her now. He remembered the training, how to move with the current, how to use his body weight to stabilize the passage, every muscle alert, every decision deliberate. Atlas guided him carefully, sniffing and adjusting, nudging him in the right direction. Then came a muffled cry, unmistakable, human, weak but present. Caleb felt a jolt of relief, adrenaline mingling with worry. He ducked under a low beam, feeling the cold scrape his forehead, and saw a small bundle partially submerged, water dripping off her rain-soaked hair. Lily's eyes met his, wide, frightened, yet alive. Caleb crouched, wrapping his arms around her, feeling her shiver against him, and whispered reassuringly, "You are safe now. I have you." Atlas pressed close, body warm, protective, a barrier between them and the rest of the tunnel's unpredictable currents. Caleb could feel the small pulse of life in her, the faint warmth against the chill, and allowed himself a moment to steady his own breathing. He checked for breathing, movement, a sign that she could hold on until they reached a safer space. The tunnel around them groaned as water shifted, droplets falling from the ceiling in rhythmic taps. Each tap echoed, each sound a reminder of the urgency, but also of the miracle quietly unfolding. A child held, a Marine resolute, a K-9 guiding, all against a torrent that had swallowed so much before. Caleb took one more deep breath, adjusting the flashlight, and prepared to move, Atlas leading, Lily cradled in his arms, each step deliberate, measured, navigating debris and currents, the water reaching his chest now. The tunnel seemed endless, yet each movement forward was progress. Every small pool crossed a victory. Caleb's eyes flicked to the water, the shadows, and the faint outline of a ladder leading upward, a promise of escape. He whispered again, steadying himself, "Almost there. Hold on just a little longer." Atlas growled softly, head low, ears swiveling to catch any sound, then nudged Caleb toward the ladder. The water swirled around them, cold biting through gloves and jacket, but Caleb did not falter. He placed Lily's small body against his chest, one arm supporting her, the other gripping the ladder rail, Atlas brushing along the side to guide and stabilize. Each step was a negotiation with gravity and the flood, but, inch by inch, they advanced. Caleb felt the surge of the current, the risk, but also the pulse of life in front of him, the heartbeat of a child, and the steadfast presence of a companion who had never failed him. The tunnel narrowed, walls damp and slick, and Caleb's mind focused on only one thing: the path forward, the safe exit. Every droplet splashing, every echo, every subtle movement of Atlas's paws on concrete communicated a language of survival, of trust, of unwavering dedication. The child stirred slightly, a small whimper that reassured Caleb more than any words could. He whispered gently, "You are going to make it. Just a little more." The tunnel stretched ahead, murky and foreboding, but the trio moved as one, Marine, K9, and child, bound by instinct, training, and the quiet miracle that held them together amidst the flood. The ladder shook beneath Caleb's hand, slick with rainwater and old rust, but he held on, pulling Lily closer against his chest as Atlas stood below them, front paws braced on the lower rung, amber eyes fixed upward. The tunnel breathed around them, not like a place made of concrete and steel, but like something tired and wounded beneath the town, filled with groans, trickles, and the heavy rush of water searching for any opening it could claim. Caleb climbed slowly, one careful step at a time, feeling the weight of the child, the drag of his soaked clothes, and the cold ache settling deep into his bones. Lily's fingers were curled weakly against his jacket. She was awake, but barely, her small breaths brushing against his collar in thin, uneven bursts. "Stay with me, sweetheart," he whispered, keeping his voice calm because panic traveled faster than water in tight spaces. "I need you to keep breathing. That is your job right now." Above them, the service hatch would not move. Caleb pressed his shoulder against it once, then again, but the metal gave only a dull complaint. Years of mud and pressure had sealed it almost shut. He adjusted his stance, one boot wedged against the narrow side rail, and tried again, careful not to jostle Lily. Nothing. For one terrible second, the tunnel seemed to close in. The flashlight beam trembled across the round hatch, across the black line where freedom should have been, across the droplets falling from the ceiling like the slow counting of a clock. Atlas barked below, sharp and insistent. Caleb looked down. The dog was no longer watching the ladder. He was staring back into the tunnel, ears high, body rigid. Then Caleb heard it too. Not the rush of water, not the groan of pipes. A voice, faint, broken, calling from deeper inside. Lily stirred in his arms, her eyes fluttering open. "Mom," she breathed. The word was so small it almost disappeared before it reached him, but it struck Caleb harder than thunder. He froze, his hand still on the hatch. "Your mom is in there?" Lily's lips trembled. She tried to answer, but only a breath came out. Atlas barked again, then splashed away from the ladder, turning back toward the darkness with the certainty of a creature that had never needed a map to find mercy. Caleb closed his eyes for half a second. Outside, there was safety, if he could force the hatch open. Inside, there was another life, another voice being swallowed by distance and rain. The old fear rose in him, cold and familiar. The creek behind his childhood home. His sister's red raincoat caught on a branch. The sound of adults shouting his name while he stood frozen on the bank, too young to understand why his legs would not move. For years, he had carried that moment like a stone under his ribs. He had become a Marine, then a rescue specialist, then a man people trusted in emergencies, but the boy at the river had never stopped trembling inside him. Lily shifted, and a tiny silver charm slipped from her sleeve, catching his flashlight beam. It was shaped like a little dog. Caleb stared at it, then down at Atlas, who stood chest deep in the water, waiting. Not begging, not panicking, waiting for him to remember who he was. Caleb swallowed, then pressed his forehead briefly against the cold metal rung. "All right," he whispered. "We are not done yet." He climbed down carefully, bringing Lily back to the narrow ledge where the water moved slower. He wrapped her in the inside of his jacket, tucking the fabric around her shoulders, then secured her with one arm, while Atlas moved close, pressing his warm body against her legs. The dog's presence steadied her. Her breathing softened, still weak, but less frightened. Caleb touched Atlas between the ears, feeling the rain and tunnel water soaked deep into the shepherd's fur. "Find her," he said. Atlas turned immediately and moved into the dark passage. Caleb followed, carrying Lily, each step heavier now, each breath measured. The tunnel widened after 20 feet, splitting into two channels beneath the old train station. One side churned with fast water. The other was quieter, almost still, but filled with floating leaves, cardboard, and the smell of wet wood. Atlas chose the quiet side. He moved slowly, nose low, then stopped near a maintenance door half hidden behind a curtain of water spilling from a cracked pipe. Caleb lifted the flashlight. The door was wedged open by a bent metal toolbox. Behind it, in a small pocket of air, a woman knelt on a raised platform, one hand gripping an overhead pipe, the other pressed against the wall, as if she had been tapping for as long as her strength allowed. Her face was pale, her hair plastered to her cheeks, her eyes fixed not on Caleb, but on the child in his arms. "Lily," she said, and the sound broke into something deeper than relief. Lily tried to lift her head. "Mom." Caleb stepped toward the platform, his throat tight, but before he could speak, the woman looked past him at Atlas. The shepherd had climbed halfway onto the platform and was nosing gently at something wrapped in Claire's raincoat. Caleb raised the light and saw a second child, a young boy with closed eyes, breathing softly, sheltered above the waterline. Claire's voice shook as she whispered, "He was on the bus with her. She would not let me leave him." Caleb looked down at Lily, at the little girl who had been pulled from the dark and still thought first of someone else. Outside, the storm kept roaring over Millhaven, but inside that forgotten tunnel, Caleb felt something quiet move through him, something warmer than courage and steadier than hope. It was the kind of mercy that did not announce itself. It simply reached for the next hand. Caleb took a steadying breath as he adjusted his hold on Lily, feeling the small, fragile weight of her in his arms, while Atlas pressed close, fur slick with water, eyes scanning every shadow for the slightest sign of danger. The tunnel stretched onward, narrowing again, the walls slick with moisture, dripping water into the already rising currents around them. Caleb's boots sent ripples through the chest-high water as he moved slowly, carefully, every step measured to maintain balance on the uneven concrete floor. The faint glow of his flashlight caught the reflection of metal rails embedded in the walls, old signs of maintenance long forgotten, and the occasional floating debris, leaves, twigs, and remnants of paper, dancing in the current like tiny boats on a turbulent river. The muffled sounds of rushing water from outside seemed to recede into a background hum as Caleb focused entirely on the path ahead, listening intently for any indication of where the tunnel led, every instinct sharpened by years of training and a lifetime of remembering the consequences of hesitation. Atlas nudged Caleb gently with his snout, redirecting him toward a side channel partially hidden by a fallen beam, the amber eyes of the dog shining with a quiet intelligence, signaling Caleb to trust him. Caleb followed without hesitation, feeling the water tug at his legs, but reassured by the sure steps of his companion. Ahead, the tunnel opened slightly into a small chamber where the water pooled, calmer here, almost still, and Caleb lowered Lily gently, letting her knees touch the shallow water as he assessed her condition. She looked up at him with wide, trusting eyes, lips quivering but breathing more steadily now. Caleb murmured reassurances, soft words carrying through the confined space, a rhythm meant to calm both child and himself. Atlas padded around the edges of the chamber, sniffing the walls, ears flicking, alert to every subtle change in the environment, his movements precise, calculated, protective. Caleb glanced up at a narrow hatch near the ceiling, light filtering faintly through cracks, hinting at the world above still shrouded in storm clouds and rain. The hatch was just out of reach, and the water level in the chamber had risen slightly with each pulse of the flood, making the task of reaching it increasingly delicate. Caleb considered the route, mapping each movement in his mind, recalling training exercises where precision and timing had saved lives, and he realized this was the same, yet infinitely more critical. With careful coordination, he positioned Lily against the side wall, letting her grip a support beam while he assessed the water's depth and current. Atlas stayed close, a steady presence, amber eyes tracking Caleb's every motion. Then Caleb noticed a slight movement in the far corner, a shadow, almost indistinguishable from the darkness of the chamber, but real. A small figure, drenched, clinging to a pipe, the unmistakable shape of Claire Whitmore reaching through the rising water to keep her balance. Her eyes met Caleb's briefly, a mixture of relief and fear, and she whispered, voice trembling, "Lily is safe with you, right?" Caleb nodded, words unnecessary, letting his actions speak as he guided the child closer to a raised platform that would allow all three of them to reach the hatch. Atlas, sensing the urgency, pressed against the side of the platform, head low, guiding both Caleb and Lily toward it, his paws slipping slightly on the wet concrete but maintaining balance through sheer instinct. Caleb reached the edge, feeling the metal cool beneath his hands, the hatch within a foot of his grasp, and whispered to Atlas, "Just a little more. Keep them steady." The dog responded with a soft bark and a nudge, acknowledging the command as if they shared a language beyond words. Caleb lifted Lily, then herself, feeling her small weight shift as she adjusted to maintain balance, and took a careful step onto the platform, water sloshing around his boots, cold biting through every layer of clothing. Claire adjusted her grip on the pipe, giving Caleb a subtle nod of encouragement, signaling readiness to follow. Caleb exhaled slowly, centering himself, then with Atlas at his side, led the way toward the hatch, each movement deliberate, each breath measured, the sound of water and distant rain creating a rhythm that matched the pulse of their hearts. As they approached, Caleb felt the faint vibrations of the floor beneath, subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to tell him the structure was holding, offering hope in the midst of uncertainty. He extended a hand to Lily, then to Claire, moving carefully, Atlas guiding from below, eyes sharp and unblinking. The trio, Marine, child, and mother, moved as one unit, Atlas orchestrating the path forward, until the hatch was within reach, a narrow shaft promising escape and the promise of safety beyond the dark, waterlogged tunnel, and Caleb could not help but feel a quiet sense of awe at the resilience before him, the courage of the small, the steadfastness of the loyal companion, and the first glimmer of hope that they might all emerge together into the world above, soaked, trembling, yet alive. Caleb positioned Lily carefully on the raised platform, wrapping her small frame tightly in his jacket, and took a moment to steady his own breathing as the tunnel groaned softly around them. The water had risen to just below the platform, lapping against the legs of Caleb and Claire, cold seeping through every layer of clothing, sending shivers up their spines. Atlas moved beside Caleb, wet fur clinging to his lean body, paws firm on the slick concrete, eyes glowing in the dim light, sensing every shift of current and echo of sound. The narrow hatch above them beckoned, a faint glimmer hinting at the world outside, light and safety waiting beyond the dark, waterlogged chamber. Caleb tested the ladder again, running a cautious hand along its wet rungs, feeling for stability, every muscle tense to prevent a slip. Claire kept her hands on the pipe overhead, balancing on the platform, eyes wide but focused, listening to Caleb's calm instructions, trusting him completely. The tunnel seemed to close in around them, water dripping from cracks, the sound of the flood above like distant drums, yet inside the chamber there was a fragile pocket of stillness, a space where careful movements and quiet determination held sway over chaos. Caleb shifted Lily gently, supporting her head as he lifted her toward the ladder, Atlas nudging her legs to guide and steady, tail brushing against her small body, offering warmth and reassurance. The child's breath came in shallow, uneven bursts, and Caleb whispered softly, "You are doing so well. Just a little more. Keep holding on." Claire glanced at him, her eyes glistening, voice low, "She is so strong." Caleb nodded, acknowledging both the child and her mother, and moved toward the ladder with slow, deliberate steps, each one calculated to maintain balance against the pull of the current and the instability of the wet concrete. Atlas continued to patrol their perimeter, alert to any subtle shift, ready to intervene with nudges and guiding motions, instincts honed from countless exercises and real missions, an unspoken understanding between dog and Marine guiding the way. Caleb reached the bottom of the ladder, adjusting his grip, and helped Lily place her small hands on the first rung, guiding them upward carefully. The child's legs trembled, water still reaching past her knees, but Caleb's calm presence and Atlas's attentive nudges created a rhythm that allowed them to move steadily upward. Claire followed, shifting her weight to match Caleb's instructions, hands gripping the ladder tightly, feet finding purchase on the slippery rungs, trusting both the Marine and the K-9 completely. The chamber around them echoed with each movement, water splashing softly against the walls, the faint sound of dripping creating a cadence that marked their progress, every small success a victory against the overwhelming flood. Caleb glanced up at the hatch, now only a few feet away, and felt a surge of cautious optimism. He whispered, "Almost there, just a little further," and adjusted Lily against his chest, Atlas pressing close for guidance and warmth. Claire inched along beside him, nodding silently, maintaining focus, supporting Lily's ascent by adjusting her grip on Caleb's jacket when necessary. The light from above grew slightly stronger, filtering through small gaps, reflecting off wet surfaces, illuminating their path just enough to provide visual reassurance. Caleb shifted his weight again, carefully placing Lily's feet onto a higher rung, guiding her hands to secure grips, while Atlas steadied her from below, eyes fixed and unblinking, ears alert to every sound. The platform beneath them rippled slightly with the pressure of water, but each movement was precise, deliberate, and coordinated, a silent conversation of trust and instinct between Marine, K9, and child. Caleb's voice remained calm. "Keep going. You are safe. You are almost out." And each word acted like a tether, anchoring Lily's courage as much as his own. The water continued its persistent rise, but they were moving as one, each step forward measured, deliberate, calculated, Atlas anticipating every potential slip or imbalance, nudging and guiding, providing an unspoken assurance that the path forward, though narrow and dangerous, was survivable. Finally, the distance between them and the hatch closed. Caleb reached up, feeling the cool metal edge, guiding Lily's hands to secure purchase while Atlas pressed against her legs, steadying her. Claire positioned herself beside them, gripping the ladder and Caleb's jacket, eyes focused, breathing steady, ready to make the final push. Caleb exhaled slowly, centered, eyes scanning the water and debris below, Atlas attentive, ears twitching, muscles coiled. Inch by inch, step by step, the trio ascended, the quiet determination of a Marine, the steadfast loyalty of a K9, and the fragile courage of a child converging in a delicate, precise rhythm that carried them ever closer to the promise of air, light, and safety beyond the flooded chamber, each movement a small triumph against the encompassing chaos. Caleb pushed upward with one shoulder beneath the hatch, feeling the old metal resist him like a door that had forgotten it was ever meant to open. Lily clung to the ladder below his arm, her small fingers pale around the rung, while Claire steadied her from behind with one hand and held the sleepy boy close with the other. Atlas waited at the base of the ladder, chest deep in the dark water, his head tilted back, eyes locked on Caleb as if lending him strength through silence. The hatch shifted a fraction of an inch. A thin blade of gray daylight cut across Caleb's face, carrying the smell of wet asphalt, diesel fumes, and rain. Outside, voices were shouting somewhere above them, blurred by concrete and stormwater. Caleb pressed again, teeth clenched, breath burning in his lungs. The metal scraped, then stopped. Mud had packed the upper rim. Something heavy sat on top. A storm drain cover, maybe. Debris. The whole town, it seemed, had placed its weight between them and the sky. "Caleb," Claire whispered, not loudly, not in panic, but with the trembling restraint of a mother trying not to frighten her child. He looked down. The water had climbed another inch. It licked at Atlas's shoulders now, cold and restless. Lily's eyes fluttered, and Caleb saw the brave mask begin to slip from her face. She was 6 years old, too young to understand flood maps, drainage pressure, emergency timing, or how close hope could stand beside danger. She only understood the dark, her mother's voice, and the dog who had found her when the world above had failed to hear. Caleb lowered his forehead against the hatch for 1 second. Just one. In that second, the memory returned, sharp and merciless. Rain on a summer creek. His little sister's hand slipping from a branch. His own voice trapped inside his chest. He had spent years trying to outrun that boy on the bank. Years letting medals, uniforms, and missions cover the silence he could never forgive. Then Atlas barked. Once. Not loud. Not frantic. A clean, commanding sound that snapped Caleb back into the living world. The shepherd was not looking at the hatch anymore. He was staring across the chamber toward the left wall, where the water slid past a row of old utility markings half hidden beneath slime and peeling paint. Caleb followed the dog's gaze. There, barely visible behind hanging wires and a rusted pipe, was a square outline in the concrete. A second access panel. Smaller. Lower. Almost invisible unless someone was searching with a reason to believe. Caleb shifted the flashlight beam, and the faded words came into view. Service crawlspace 3. There is another way, he said softly. Claire stared at him, afraid to hope too quickly. Can it lead out? Caleb looked at Atlas. The dog had already turned toward it, swimming the last few feet. Paws finding submerged footholds beneath the surface. Caleb gave a short nod. Atlas thinks so. That is good enough for me. He climbed back down, careful and controlled, guiding Lily into Claire's arms for a moment while he moved toward the panel. The screws were swollen with rust. His fingers slipped once, then again, but he kept working, using the edge of a broken bracket as a lever. The metal gave a tired groan. Behind him, Lily whispered, "Mr. Caleb?" He turned. "Yes, ma'am." Her voice shook. "Is Atlas scared?" Caleb looked at the shepherd. Atlas stood in the rising water with his ears high, his soaked fur dark against the gray light, his body angled between the children and the current. He was tired. Caleb could see it in the slow rise of his ribs, in the tremble of his legs, in the way he blinked against the water dripping from his brow. But scared was not the word. Loyal was closer. Faithful was closer still. "Maybe a little," Caleb said gently. "But brave does not mean you are never scared. Brave means you keep loving anyway." Lily seemed to hold those words carefully, like a small warm stone in both hands. The panel finally broke free. A narrow passage opened behind it, barely 3 feet high, slanting upward into darkness. A thin draft brushed Caleb's cheek. Fresh air. Faint, but real. He almost laughed, but it came out as a breath of gratitude instead. Atlas pushed his nose into the opening, sniffed, then looked back. Caleb understood. The dog could fit. The children could fit. Claire could crawl through if she stayed low. Caleb would be the hardest part. Broad shoulders, soaked gear, stiff joints from cold. But there was no time to measure fear. "We go one at a time," he said. "Lily first, then the boy, then you, Claire. Atlas will lead. I will stay behind until everyone is through." Claire's face tightened. "No, we all go together." Caleb shook his head, calm but firm. "That is how we all make it." Lily reached for Atlas as Caleb helped her into the crawlspace. The dog moved ahead slowly, placing each paw with care, pausing every few feet so she could touch his tail and know he was still there. The boy followed, wrapped in Claire's raincoat, blinking sleepily but breathing steady. Claire went next, whispering encouragement in the dark. Caleb waited until her shoes disappeared into the narrow passage, then turned back to the chamber. The water had reached the platform now. The old hatch above them remained sealed, gray light shining through its cracks like a promise delayed. Caleb placed one hand against the concrete wall, feeling the tunnel shutter softly beneath the town, and for the first time in years, he did not hear his sister accusing him in the water. He heard Atlas ahead, breathing, guiding, refusing to leave anyone behind. Caleb lowered himself into the crawlspace, shoulders scraping the sides, cold water pushing at his boots from behind, and whispered into the dark, "Not this time." The crawlspace was narrow, every movement deliberate, water pressing against Caleb's legs, cold and insistent. But Atlas moved ahead, steady, ears swiveling, nose low, guiding the way as if the path had been mapped into his instincts long before they ever entered the tunnel. Caleb adjusted the flashlight, light trembling across damp walls and the occasional glint of submerged metal, reflecting off puddles and creating dancing patterns that made shadows flicker like living things. Lily clutched Caleb's jacket, small fingers trembling but steady, trusting his every motion, while Claire followed close behind, keeping the young boy wrapped in her arms, careful not to slip on the slick concrete beneath. The passage sloped upward gently, but the water resisted, currents tugging at their feet, threatening to slow progress with each step. Caleb felt the familiar weight of responsibility, not only for the children and Claire, but for Atlas, who had placed himself as the unspoken guardian, shoulder to shoulder with the Marine, reading the dark currents and guiding them with an unerring instinct. The draft of fresher air grew slightly stronger, a whisper against the damp concrete, carrying the faintest scent of rain-soaked streets above, a reminder that escape was near, that the world outside had not forgotten them, and that the storm, for all its fury, was not absolute. Caleb's muscles burned from exertion, his arms, ached from cradling Lily and maneuvering through the narrow, wet tunnel, yet every step forward was met with Atlas's soft, steady nudges and the rhythmic sound of paws on concrete, affirming progress, offering reassurance, a silent signal that they could rely on him to lead the way. Claire's quiet murmurs to the boy and Lily kept their spirits intact, small words of encouragement and comfort that wove a fragile shield around them against the oppressive darkness, allowing the children to focus on the touch and guidance of the hands and the warmth of the jacket and the unwavering presence of Atlas beside them. Caleb paused for a moment, feeling the cold water swirling around his legs and ankles, listening for the subtlest shift, the faintest sound that might indicate an obstruction or a sudden drop, every sense alert, every decision deliberate, every breath a measured cadence in the symphony of survival unfolding within the tunnel. Atlas barked softly, a low sound that drew Caleb's attention to a corner where debris had shifted, creating a small ledge just wide enough for them to rest momentarily. Caleb gently placed Lily on the ledge, keeping his arm around her shoulders, her small body shivering but steady, and then reached for the boy, adjusting him against his chest as Claire steadied her own balance, feeling the tension in every muscle, the dampness clinging to clothes, the water pressing insistently against them. The flashlight beam illuminated the far end of the crawl space, catching the edge of another service hatch, slightly ajar, light spilling faintly from outside, a beacon of hope amidst the wet, echoing dark. Caleb felt a surge of determination, a quiet resolve that had been tempered over years of experience, loss, and reflection, guiding him forward without hesitation. He placed the boy in a position where he could cling to Caleb's jacket and the ladder-like supports along the wall, small hands gripping tightly, and whispered softly to steady both children. Almost there, just a few more feet. Atlas moved ahead again, sensing the subtle variations in the path, leading the way with a confidence born of instinct and training, glancing back occasionally, to ensure all three remained together. Caleb followed, careful with each step, lifting Lily when needed, adjusting the boy, navigating the rising water, the slick surfaces, the occasional sharp edge hidden beneath the surface, trusting Atlas's judgment entirely. The draft of outside air grew stronger, carrying the faint scent of wet asphalt, rain, and the distant hum of the town beyond, a reminder that safety awaited, that the effort, the fear, and the tension would soon yield to relief and warmth. Caleb's heart pounded, each beat synchronized with the rhythm of careful movement, with Atlas's steady guidance, with Claire's soft encouragements and the children's tentative trust, creating a harmonious cadence of persistence and hope. Inch by inch, the crawl space gave way, the light grew brighter, and Caleb knew that every cautious, measured movement had brought them closer to the moment when the storm above would no longer threaten, when the dark, flooded chamber would be left behind, and the quiet triumph of loyalty, courage, and unwavering faith in one another would carry them into the world beyond. The service hatch at the end of the crawl space did not open into freedom at first. It opened into a narrow concrete well beneath the old train station, where the storm had turned every sound into an echo and every breath into steam. Caleb pushed the panel outward with both hands, then guided Lily through first, lifting her gently into the shallow corner where the water only reached her ankles. Atlas climbed out beside her, shaking once, then immediately pressing his damp body against her legs as if he understood that warmth was not just comfort now, but medicine. Claire followed with the young boy wrapped close against her, her face pale, her lips trembling from cold, yet her eyes never leaving her daughter. When Lily saw her mother fully in the weak gray light, she reached out without speaking. Claire dropped to her knees in the water and pulled the child close, holding her with a kind of careful desperation, as if one wrong movement might wake them all from the miracle. Caleb turned away for a second, not because he did not want to see it, but because some moments were too holy to stare at. He aimed the flashlight up the well. 10 feet above them, an iron grate covered the opening to the street. Through its slats, he could see rain falling hard, the blurred flash of emergency lights, and the dark underside of a rescue truck parked somewhere nearby. He shouted once. His voice bounced back down at him. He shouted again, louder this time. For a moment, nothing answered but rain. Then Atlas barked. Not once, but 3 times, sharp and clean, each bark rising through the grate like a flare fired into the storm. Above them, a voice called out, muffled but real. "Is someone down there?" Caleb's chest loosened so suddenly he almost had to brace himself against the wall. "For civilians and 1 Marine," he called back. "2 children. We need blankets and a lift line." There was movement overhead, boots splashing through water, metal scraping, men and women calling to each other in urgent, practiced voices. The grate shifted, then stopped. It was pinned under a branch and a heavy piece of street sign carried in by the flood. Caleb looked up, watching the rescuers work from above, then down at the people huddled in the well. Lily was fading in and out of exhausted sleep against Claire's shoulder. The boy had opened his eyes and was watching Atlas with a quiet wonder children sometimes have when fear begins to loosen its grip. He reached one hand toward the dog. Atlas lowered his head and let the boy touch his wet fur. "He came back," the boy whispered. Caleb knelt beside him. "Yes, he did. Lily told me dogs know the way home." Caleb looked at Lily, tucked under her mother's chin, her small silver dog charm resting against the soaked collar of his jacket. She was right. Above them, the metal groaned. A rescuer shouted that they needed 1 more minute. 1 more minute sounded small in daylight. Down there, with cold water creeping around their feet and the storm still pressing against the town, it felt enormous. Claire looked at Caleb then, really looked at him, as if seeing past the soaked clothes, the tired eyes, the marine posture that refused to bend even when his body wanted to. "You came into that tunnel for strangers," she said softly. Caleb shook his head. "Atlas heard you, but you followed him." The words settled in the well, quiet and heavy. Caleb had no answer ready. For years, he had believed courage was something loud, something with medals pinned to it, something proven under fire or flood or command. But here, beneath a train station in a town most people would forget by morning, courage looked different. It looked like a mother tapping on a wall until her fingers ached because her child was still out there. It looked like a 6-year-old making room for another child on a narrow shelf above dark water. It looked like a tired German shepherd standing between fear and the fragile lives he had chosen to guard. And maybe, Caleb thought, it looked like an old wound finally being asked to serve someone else instead of staying buried inside him. The grate above them jerked free with a metallic cry. Gray daylight poured down, thin and beautiful. A firefighter leaned over the opening, rain streaming from the brim of his helmet. "We have you," he called. "Send the kids first." Caleb nodded. Atlas stood immediately, as if he had been waiting for the order. A harness was lowered, yellow straps bright against the concrete dark. Caleb secured Lily first, checking each buckle twice, his fingers stiff but steady. Claire kissed her daughter's forehead and whispered something too soft for anyone else to hear. As Lily rose toward the opening, she looked down at Atlas. Her lips moved. Caleb could barely hear her over the rain. "Do not leave him." Atlas watched her go, ears forward, water dripping from his muzzle. The boy went next, clutching the rescue straps with one hand and still holding a small torn piece of Claire's raincoat in the other. Then Claire. She hesitated before they lifted her, reaching down to squeeze Caleb's hand. "You saved my family." Caleb looked at Atlas, then back at her. "No, ma'am. We listened in time." When she disappeared into the gray light, Caleb stood alone with Atlas in the well. For a few quiet seconds, neither moved. The water swirled around their boots and paws. The storm breathed above them. Caleb crouched, pressing his forehead against Atlas's wet brow. "You found them," he whispered. Atlas exhaled softly, warm against Caleb's cheek. Then, from the street above, Lily's small voice called through the rain, clearer now, alive and waiting. "Atlas." The dog's ears lifted. Caleb smiled for the first time that night, tired, broken open, and full of something he had not trusted in years. Not victory, not pride, grace. The rain had finally softened to a drizzle, and Millhaven's streets glimmered under the pale wash of early morning light, reflecting puddles that mirrored a sky slowly brightening with soft gray and gold. Caleb stood on the sidewalk, drenched and exhausted, Atlas at his side, fur still damp but sleek and warm, tail wagging slowly, eyes bright and alert. The rescue team had gathered around Claire and the children, wrapping them in blankets, offering warm drinks, gentle words, and steady hands. Lily pressed her small face against her mother's chest, the charm of the little dog in her hand glinting faintly, as if catching the first shy sunbeams. Caleb watched quietly, letting the mother and child share the moment, the boy beside them laughing softly as he pointed to Atlas, who nudged him with a wet nose, ears flicking, content to be acknowledged at last. He felt a strange weight lift from his chest, a quiet, subtle shift that had nothing to do with medals or recognition, but with the deep, unspoken understanding that his presence, his choices, and the loyalty of Atlas had altered the course of events, saved fragile lives, and restored something intangible but vital. Faith in human kindness and the trust that exists when courage meets compassion. The street, still slick and reflective, seemed to hold its breath as neighbors emerged cautiously from houses and porches, drawn by the quiet calm that followed the storm, murmuring and pointing, witnessing the small miracle unfold in understated fashion. Caleb saw the children laughing softly, Lily letting Atlas lick her wet hand, the boy holding his mother's arm, and Claire bending down, brushing the damp hair from Lily's forehead, eyes meeting Caleb's with a profound, wordless gratitude. Atlas nudged Caleb's leg, looking up at him with intelligent, steady eyes. The kind of gaze that carries understanding beyond words, reminding him that the dog had known, had guided, had held steady when fear would have been easier. Caleb bent slightly, hand resting on Atlas's head, feeling the warmth beneath his damp fur, and thought of the hours in darkness and water, of the moments when panic and hope had mingled into something almost tangible, guiding them all step by step toward survival. Emergency lights flashed faintly in the distance, and the town slowly came to life. But this corner of the street, this quiet group of survivors, was suspended in its own rhythm, each breath, each heartbeat marking the triumph of steadfastness, of careful attention, of silent heroism. Claire smiled faintly, letting the children play with Atlas while she spoke softly to the rescue personnel, explaining how close they had been to being lost, her voice shaking but strong, carrying relief and recognition for Caleb without need for ceremony or fanfare. Caleb watched the movement, noting the calm steadiness in the children, the way they trusted Atlas implicitly, the way Claire had transformed fear into gentle laughter, the way the city itself seemed to exhale, the storm passing and leaving a silence filled with possibility. He realized that the tunnel, the dark water, the narrow crawl space had been more than obstacles. They had been instruments of patience and courage, revealing the bonds that endure in extreme moments, the loyalty and instinct that persist even when human understanding falters. Caleb knelt briefly beside Lily, adjusting the small blanket around her shoulders, her head resting lightly against Atlas's wet side, and whispered softly, "You are safe now." She blinked up at him, amber eyes bright, a small smile tugging at her lips, and he felt the final, quiet confirmation that their journey through darkness had ended not with triumph shouted, but with grace felt, shared, and quietly understood. Around them, the town began to stir, rain-soaked streets reflecting morning light, and Caleb took a slow, steadying breath, looking down at Atlas, then at the family, and understood fully that courage, loyalty, and trust had woven a miracle in silence, leaving each life touched, not just saved, but changed, renewed, and carried forward with a fragile, shining faith in humanity.